Everyone. I want you to know you're in the right place for a webinar with Operation Parent, as well as the Caron Education Alliance team. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Tina George. She's a senior coordinator of Education Alliance at Caron Treatment Center, where she oversees the educational services, including prevention, substance use education that Caron provides to schools, educators, students, and families in Pennsylvania. She is a lead trainer for the Pennsylvania Student Assistant Certification Program that trains teachers and administrators to participate in their school student assistant teams. Tina is particularly proud of developing the Peak Performance Program, which educates student athletes about the impact of substance use on athletic performance and how to be at peak performance to meet team and personal goals. Her experience of being a Division I athlete herself, as well as raising two daughters in competitive sports, one who is a collegiate division soccer player and another who will be a collegiate division cheerleader, this has all fueled her passion for prevention in athletics. Today, you're going to be in really good hands with an expert on substances, recovery, and how to prevent substance use with involved students, athletes, organizations, and teams. I'd like to take a moment and also thank Natalie Price, who's the regional prevention specialist here in the state of Kentucky, for the introduction to Tina. Now, before we hand it over to Tina George, I want to tell you a couple things. You are going to get a recording of the webinar, a certificate of attendance, and a link to the survey within 5 hours of this presentation. So we have had really great participation in our survey. Our audience has been very generous, and we read every word of that. We utilize it to continue growing and planning the webinar program. So please continue to do that for us along the way. Let me tell you a little bit about us here at Operation Parent. We're a nonprofit, and it's our mission to love and support parents by providing real-world information, connection, and most importantly, hope. We have some exciting webinars coming up very quickly after this one with Tina. We have Dr. Aaron Weiner returning to do vaping in 2025 and what you as parents are going to need to know about that. That's going to be on February the 18th. And then also we're going to be joined by Laura Stack. She's going to be unpacking the risk of modern marijuana so that parents can also be up to speed there. That one's on March the 4th. There's a pop-up right here, a quick pop-up that will allow you to register for both of those future webinars. And now it's my distinct pleasure to turn the presentation over to Tina.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the opportunity, Operation Parents, giving me today and all the participants to spend some time together learning about this really important topic. As said, I have been at Caron Treatment Center for around 20 years, a little more, doing in our Education Alliance, doing prevention, intervention, and postvention programming in schools. But I've been in the behavioral health world for over 30 years. And this is a program, my Peak Performance program is a program that is kind of marrying my two worlds, my professional world and my personal world, especially as a mom of an athlete. My oldest daughter, she played 3 sports in high school. She was involved in 2 travel teams. She ended up being a Division I athlete, played some semi-pro soccer as well. And she just recently hung up her cleats. So that has been a whole nother experience. Life after sport has been interesting. But also then my youngest daughter is in the process of recruitment for probably one of the more dangerous sports, which is competitive cheer. So that's been a whole new sport for me to kind of get my head around. It's been interesting to be a part of. And as a result of that, I've also sit on the board president for her particular cheer organization, her travel cheer team. So have that perspective as well. And I think it's really great to just understand, where I'm coming from, my point of view as I share some of this information with you today. Just a brief, a little bit about Caron Treatment Centers. We have been around for over 70 years, actually, doing behavioral health treatment for a long time. We did just substance use disorders, but now we do all behavioral health and have multiple facilities throughout the East Coast, lots of different treatment opportunities, inpatient and outpatient, and we've been doing that. We're internationally known for our treatment. But I'm a part of our Education Alliance, which is again, been around for a very long time as well. And we have staff located all along the East Coast, again, providing prevention, intervention, postvention, programming with all behavioral health services in schools, helping schools with that. So and there's a little QR code if you want some more information about where I'm coming from. Today, we're going to talk about, these are our key takeaways that I really am hoping to educate you on throughout this webinar. And that is to understand the impact of sports on overall wellness, right? So, how does it affect our kids physically, mentally, and how do we teach them healthy coping skills and strategies? We're going to learn about different substances that are popular today, especially among our athletes, and how they impact their wellness as well as their athletic performance. And we're also going to discuss the best prevention efforts that we as parents can provide to our athletes team, so that this experience, sports are great experiences, and we can contribute to that being a positive, healthy growth experience for our athletes, our students. But the other thing that I really want you to leave with today is feeling empowered as parents. I want you to feel like this is something I can address and have a conversation with my athlete about. I want to emphasize that parents are the number one influence on their child's relationship or experiences with substances. It's not their friends. It's not social media. It's not creative marketing. Those things are absolutely very strong factors, but the strongest is you as parents. And so I want to empower you to take that role and the importance of that role, and making sure that we're having, those conversations, and that your thoughts on this are the most important to them. And so I also, in addition to empowering you, I want to do a call to action that after today, I want you to have a conversation with your child about what you learned today. And as we're going through this information, I talked to you about my background and my lens that I look at all of this information through. But I want you to look at it through yours as well as your child's lens. What information that we talk about today might lend itself to a really productive conversation, talking early and often. You're going to hear me say that often throughout this presentation. This isn't a once and done conversation. This is how infusing it in our conversations with our kids in a variety of different ways. And I'm hoping that as we're going through some of the information, you'll say, wow, I think that would really resonate with my child, or wow, I don't think my kid knows that information. I'm gonna talk to them about that tonight. So that's my hope for you, to learn these takeaways, but also feeling empowered that you are their greatest influence, and to have that conversation with them as much as you can. The other thing that I want to just kind of talk about, some statistics, give you kind of create a scope of what we're really talking about here today, that there are over 8 million high school athletes in the United States. And we're looking at about 55 to almost 57% of high school students play a school-sponsored sport. And this is a statistic that has grown over the last 20 years consistently, never dropped. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. Also, there's only 493,000 Division I, Division II, Division III athletes in the country, which means that only 6% of those high school students who play a sport will get the opportunity to play that sport in college. And I do a lot of athlete prevention in high schools, and I always ask, how many of you want to play your sport in college? And it is always over 90% of them raise their hand, I want to play my sport in college. And only 6% of them will actually get the opportunity to do that. And so I use this as a pick to kind of set the stage of how it's become so competitive. It's always been competitive, but now it's more competitive than ever. So what students are willing to do to make themselves stand out, perform better than their peers, is it varies for those athletes. So we're going to talk about some of those ways that they can do that in a healthy way or a not so healthy way. Some more, again, creating the scope of what we're talking about today. When we polled college athletes today, they are now 60% of college athletes are reporting severe to moderate levels of anxiety, which is significantly higher than even 5 years ago. 47% of elite athletes report that they struggle with anxiety and depression. 28% of student athletes report problematic substance use. 50% of elite athletes report poor sleep quality. I do a whole thing with athletes on healthy sleep habits because we know sleep is so connected to their overall well-being. 40% of athletes experience stigma related to mental health support, right? A lot of messaging to athletes to kind of keep pushing through. We're seeing a lot of education on this lately. It's really getting a lot of national attention because we have some elite athletes now that are willing to talk out and speak about it. But the messaging that they do receive is that you just keep going, despite some of those things that you might be experiencing. And sadly, of those athletes who are experiencing concerns with their well-being, only 20% of those college athletes have sought treatment for any kind of mental health concerns that they're experiencing. So that's, again, why we're having these conversations, to really bring attention to it, the scope of the issue, and to really not just empower you as parents, but empower our athletes to really start talking about their mental health, their substance use, their overall well-being as athletes. So I want to talk about, and we'll get into this at various times, especially when we're talking about different substances, but signs and symptoms that there could be something going on for your child. And, I look at this list, and, if we're talking about teenagers, many of these things on the list were like, well, that's normal teenage behavior. But when I asked you to kind of look at all of this through your child's lens, we're looking for behaviors or indicators that are different than what you normally experience with your child, with your athlete. We're looking for behavioral indicators, changing in their athletic performance, changes of athletic performance, withdrawal from their team and activities. They don't want to go anymore, or they're just not performing like they used to. What is going on? They seem to have lost their passion for it. And sometimes that happens, and that's okay. But is there something else going on that we want to explore? Increased irritability and mood swings, right? Yeah, Teenagers tend to be a little moody, but we're talking about things that seem to be a result of something, or it seems to be much worse, or they can't seem to get past it. Social isolation, not hanging out with their peers, their friend group, an overall lack of motivation. You start hearing the negative self-talk, especially when things really do become competitive and they're comparing themselves to others. And then that extreme perfectionism where they are pushing themselves beyond what's really acceptable. So those are some things that we want to be on the lookout for. And again, what's your child, and what's normal for them, and then what is something that's different or concerning. And then also those physical indicators. Unusually fatigued. They are fatigued. These are athletes who are incredibly stressed, who are stretched to the limit when it comes to their time, but they can't sleep at night. They're waking up. They can't stay asleep, those kinds of things. Changes in appetite patterns, no longer eating breakfast, no longer fueling properly. And it's different. I have to remind my daughter, you need to eat before you go to practice. That's normal. Me trying to do that. But really, if there's refusal, if there's avoidance, things like that. Changes in sleep patterns where they really, truly are struggling. And this is something it's not the night before a big competition, but it's, ongoingly struggles. Changes in physical appearance. If you do know about substance use, anything where we're seeing an increase in heart rate, blood pressure, or any kind of trembling, any kind of, again, physical indicators that are unusual for your child, that's when we have to start asking some question. Could be many things, but it's definitely enough for us to say, what's going on here? We need to look into that further. So, and because we know if we're seeing some of those things, and sometimes we're hesitant, right, to see if it kind of resolves themselves. But I really encourage you to ask the questions, to provide support. And because we know if we don't address those things, it could affect their performance level, how long they stay in their sport, and it can stay with them after they're finished with their sport. They may continue to struggle with some mental health, some substance use issues, right? So let's not let things just resolve on their own or think it's temporary. Let's really show care and concern and ask questions so we can see what kind of support. And the earlier we provide support, the better the outcomes are going to be anyway. So we want to get lower levels of support to resolve any concerns. So really staying on top of it is important. I can't talk about this subject without talking about the adolescent brain, right? And this goes for regardless of if your child's an athlete, a musician, whatever it is that they're into. This is all adolescence that we have to have this conversation. And this is what separates when we're talking about substance use for adolescents and teens versus substance use for adults, right? We're talking about two different things, right? So, I get parents all the time saying, are you saying I shouldn't have any alcohol in my house? Are you saying I should? No, that's yours. I'm talking about your child and why this is not good for them. We know that this brain is vulnerable and it's learning, and we know that can be up to 24, 25 years of age, right? And we know that the brain starts to develop from back to front, right? And so the first part of that brain to develop is that limbic system, which is their reward center, right? And that's what kids are always looking for, the thing that makes them feel good, right? My daughter makes plans for the weekend and Monday rolls around. She's always already talking about plans for next weekend, right? It's like they really want to live life, right? And so that's driving many of the things that they do. They want to feel good. They want to be excited. They want to find pleasure, right? And so this is a very sophisticated part of their brain. Substances prey on that. And so especially for our adolescents, their experience with a substance is very different than with an adult because they're going to feel it much more greater. And not only are they going to feel it in a different way, they're also going to be rewarded for it. Their brain is going to say, this very confused brain that is trying to develop and make sense of what's going on up here add a substance and it's very directive, and it's going to say, hey, do that again. That makes sense to me. That makes me feel good. You like to feel good. Do it again, do it again, do it again. It is a very different experience than what an adult would experience, right? So we have that very developed limbic system that is constantly telling them to do things again that make them feel good. And the last part of that brain, as we're developing back to front, is that frontal lobe, right? Which is responsible for logic, impulse control, decision making. And this is not to say that your kids can't use logic or reasoning. They can. It's just not the dominant thing. I think I have pretty luckily, cross my fingers, really pretty good kids. And yet, I have said many times, what were you thinking when they do something that just seems out of character? Or why would you take that risk? Or why would you think of doing that? And they kind of look at you, and I ask, what were you thinking? And they look at me with this blank look, like I can't really explain it. Well, it's because they weren't thinking, right? Because we have a limbic system that's speaking much louder than the frontal lobe. And that's kind of what we need to kick in. So they can utilize it. It's not that they're incapable, but it's definitely not what they are going to lead with. And it gets complicated because we have that limbic system speaking much louder. So we could do a whole webinar on that, and I bet Operation Parent actually has one on that. So anyway, I wanted to at least talk about that from all adolescents and how vulnerable and why we want to protect their brain and allow it to develop and mature and be the best version of themselves. And the best way we can do that is to keep them substance free. I also wanted to, as we're looking at the scope of this, again, the status of teen mental health, 1 in 7 adolescents are currently diagnosed with a behavioral health condition. The number 1 being anxiety, and the number 2 being depression. And just a little over 50% of those kids who have been diagnosed are receiving treatment for that. So, and these are kids that have been diagnosed, that have gotten to the resource that has been able to diagnose them. We have a lot of kids who are not diagnosed and then subsequently not getting the treatment that they need. And so when we're talking about whether they've been diagnosed or not, the more recent CDC report, and when we say this, I get a lot of parents who say, how do we know that that's accurate? Well, not only does the CDC do reports, other national organizations do similar, as well as state and local entities are doing are reports like this, studies like this, and there's consistency among these reports. And so what the CDC most recently reported is that 40% of teens report consistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. 20% seriously considered suicide. 22% reported drinking alcohol within 30 days of taking the survey, and 17% reported using cannabis within 30 days of taking the survey. So these are things that are on the rise, and certainly things for us to pay attention to and educate ourselves in platforms like this, so we can address that if we have concerns about our own child. So when we talk about athletes and why they are great at risk, in particular to substance use, is when we think about what makes them great athletes, right? They're feeling invincible, right? They think they can do anything. I just watched the AFC and NFC championship games this weekend, and my daughter had a few of her friends over to watch with me, and a couple of them were boys, and they were saying, I would have caught that, or I wouldn't have done that play. I could have done it better. And I'm thinking, really? They feel like they are invincible, that they can do anything, right? And they have to feel that way if they're going to be successful in their sport. They are sensation seekers. That feeling that they get, it's very much like a substance. I always say, sports are your drug of choice, right? You're getting the same thing. It's doing the same thing to your limbic system. So they're sensation seekers. They're looking for that feeling. Why else would they spend 90% of their time practicing and only 10% of their time actually competing? Because when they are competing, that is such a great feeling for them. And they are risk takers as athletes. And that's, again, we want to allow them to take those risks in the healthiest way possible. Right? But these are the things that make them great athletes. But there's also then that connection to substances as well, right? There's people who are, especially teens, who are using substances, have a feeling of invincibility. They are sensation seekers and they are risk takers. Like, they don't think that this is going to impact them now or in the future. So they're looking for that reward, that limbic system speaking much louder. So we want to put in healthy things to protect them. And that's, again, why we're meeting today. The other risk factors that I want to talk about is identity formation. And we'll talk about this again a little later, but this really does, their sport really does become their identity. They spend most of their time with their teammates, right? Or with other athletes that play the same sport as them. They are wearing clothing that represents their sport, their team, to school almost every day, right? So it becomes their identity. It becomes, when you ask them, "Oh, tell me about yourself," they're identifying themselves by their sport. So it's a big part of who they are. That social isolation, they really do tend to just hang out with the folks that they are playing their sports with. So they're not hanging out with all different peer groups. They tend to gravitate towards each other. And so we want to make sure that group is really positive and healthy. Athletic injury is one of the most vulnerable times for our athletes, right? If you think about their sport being their drug of choice, and now we just take it away, we do see withdrawal symptoms from their sport. And if any of you have had an athlete who's experienced an injury, they're sidelined, and you see signs of depression, extreme irritability, anger, just really, really struggling during those times because something that was a big part of them and feeding that limbic system has been taken away. So it's really tough for them. So a very vulnerable time, and we want to help them make healthy decisions and really key in. And then coping with performance stress. This is very stressful when only 6% of them are going to get the opportunity to play in college. They can't skip a game for an injury. They can't be sidelined. They can't let the freshmen coming up take their place. They need to play in next week's game because a college scout is coming. Whatever it is, they are under the microscope at very young ages to perform at the highest level possible. So a lot of performance stress for them as well. When we're looking at substance use, there's some things that are just for all teens, right? That are true for our athletes as well. And that is, do they have a genetic predisposition for substance use? What are the family influences? Are parents having conversations? What messages? And no message is a message, right? So what kind of messages are we sending? Peer pressure, the students, the athletes, the teammates that they surround themselves with, are these positive influences? Lack of education, they're getting a lot of misinformation these days, right? They think they know, but there's a lot of marketing out there giving them a lot of mixed messages, a lot of bad, incorrect information. And so giving them the right information is really important. And then, of course, mental health plays a part of it, right? So if their mental health isn't being cared for and they're not receiving the help they need for that, we also oftentimes see athletes and or students in general seeking substances during that time to cope with whatever's happening and has been left unaddressed. So those are things that athletes have similar to all students. But then there's other differences as well. That performance, are they using so that, are they borrowing someone's pain medication so they can continue to play through an injury? And now they continue to use that medication. Are they coping with injuries and that's leaving them very vulnerable during that time? Are they using to lose weight or other things to help with their body and performance? And then feelings of invincibility around substance use, whether that's perceived or societally supported. I've worked with many coaches who are not always addressing some of the concerns that come in because they need this student, they need this athlete. And so sometimes giving them passes for substance use, or they don't want to interrupt any potential success that they might have by addressing it. We really want to make sure that anytime we have a concern, we want to address it, right? So does the student feel like I'm untouchable? I'm the quarterback. We're going to states. There's no way anyone's going to hold me accountable. Or is that perceived? Or is that real? What kind of messages are they getting? So being very careful about that. I want to go into substances of abuse and caffeine, and probably most of us are guilty. I think it's the greatest illustration of how substance dependence and substance use disorders can occur. I think about our caffeine use, right? I started drinking caffeine and I'd have 1 cup a day. Then all of a sudden I needed 2 cups a day. And then that cup wasn't just a small cup, it was a larger. So we see tolerance growing over time. And if I stopped for some reason, I'd have the worst headache. I'm in withdrawal. All those things are present. So, caffeine, I think, is the best illustration about substance use that so many of us can relate to. But when it comes to sports, this is the most widely abused substance among athletes. And I think we minimize that. And, there was, I remember back in 2015, Serena Williams was at the Hopman Cup. And you can look this up. You can see this video where she actually stopped. She's at the end of a match and she stops and asks for an espresso, and they couldn't figure out in the rule book how she could not do this. So they literally bring her out an espresso, and she drinks the espresso and she comes back and she wins the match. And ever since then, we see tons of caffeine related products that are really being pushed for athletes. And what we know about caffeine, there's a lot of different information around caffeine. And is it good to use for performance? Is it not good to use for performance? And the reality is, and in this situation with Serena Williams, she needed about 5 more minutes of extra energy. And what caffeine will do will take anything you have left, push it to the surface and let you use it, followed by extreme exhaustion and fatigue. So when we have athletes who are drinking highly caffeinated drinks before they go to practice, before they go to a game, it's just so bad for them. There is no nutritional value for them. It's going to exhaust them a lot quicker. It affects every single system of their body. It increases heart rate, blood pressure while they're doing an activity that increases heart rate and blood pressure. Not good. It's absorbed by all your tissues. It affects their sleep patterns. They don't see it, but it does. Caffeine will not allow them to get to stage 3, 4 sleep, which is what they need as athletes to repair muscles and to help them heal from injuries. It's essential, and it's not going to let them get there. And then also they have that jolt and crush cycle, not to mention the dehydration. Like, dehydration is very, very tough on athletes, right? It's literally dehydrating those muscles. And that's when we see injuries occur as well, because their muscles are not adequately hydrated. And that's when we see muscle tears. That's when we see unsupported muscles not being able to support the activity. So, and they're not equating it to their caffeine use, but it's definitely something that we want to talk to our athletes about. And I do these talks, and this is I say this is a Starbucks nation. Like, these kids love their Dunkin', they love of their Starbucks or whatever it is that they're doing right now. So I to avoid them throwing things at me when I mention this, I don't say you can't use caffeine, but I really do say, hey, 2 or 3 hours before a practice or game, don't use any, just focus on hydration. Focus on hydration. And so sometimes I can get away with it that way. We're talking about it. Pre-workout and supplements. I want to just drive home protein powders, pre-workout things, all these things that they're using right now. These were never approved nor are they recommended for anyone under the age of 18. Anyone at the age of 18. And if you've seen just recently, please look it up. But there's new information around a lot of the protein powders that are out there testing positive for heavy metals, pesticides, and added sugars, right? So these are not FDA regulated. So what they say they do may not be in there. And in fact, more harmful things might be in there. And I have had a lot of colleges reach out and say, hey, we're testing this kid and they're coming up positive for steroids, for amphetamines, all kinds of things. And they're saying they're not doing anything, but they are using a supplement. Is this possible? And absolutely, it is possible. So they could get positive drug screens from some of these things without ever using that substance. So definitely, there's an organization called NSF for sport. And if that logo is not on those containers, don't use that substance. That is not an okay substance. NSF for sport is what you're looking for. But again, not recommended for anyone under the age of 18. Vaping, and I was so glad to see that there is a vaping presentation because we can do a whole presentation about vaping, and I strongly encourage you to log into that webinar as well because we can't get enough information about this as parents. So, but when it comes to sports, it's going to elevate heart rate and blood pressure. Again, not good when we're doing a sport. Obviously, shortness of breath, cause a chronic cough, increasing blood pressure. It's going to weaken their immune system as well as their muscle endurance. It's going to weaken their muscle reaction. And so we want them to not have nicotine in their system. This is zero. Nothing good is going to happen, but it will affect their immune system, their muscle strength and duration, and obviously their respiratory system, which is, think about your child's sport and what they do. Do they need those things? I'm guessing yes. Alcohol is also something we need to be having a conversation with. And, I think overall, we kind of normalize this for teenagers when, we think that everybody does it, but the reality is not everybody does it. In fact, we see about 30 to 33% of high school students use alcohol, which means, 60-some% of students are choosing not to use alcohol. So that idea that everybody does it is simply not true. It's just maybe everybody your child knows does that. And that's a concern, right? So we don't want to normalize this for kids. It's going to, when it comes to athletics, it's going to slow down their reaction time, decrease their hand-eye coordination, impact their strength and endurance, their jump height, slower run times, faster fatigue, impair their overall coordination and judgment. And then the dehydration is, again, huge, right? And we know that as adults, if some of us partake in alcohol, that the next day after we, have had a glass of wine, we're really parched, right? Think about what that's doing. And I don't know of athletes who are coming to practice or coming to games under the influence of alcohol, right? Not that I haven't seen that, but it's so rare. So it's not always about alcohol being in your system at that time that you're practicing or you're about to perform. It's this idea of post-acute withdrawal. So what happens with alcohol is, although you metabolize alcohol fairly quickly, some different than others, but what does happen is the dehydration causes what we call post-acute withdrawal for another 48 to 72 hours after that last drink, meaning that it will take you 48 to 72 hours of concentrated hydration to get you back to normal. I do this a lot with college athletes where I say, okay, let's look at your season and let's mark up, because they know, oh, wow, we can drink on these days. Like they have the 24, 48, 72 hour rule in college. So I go into a college athletes team and they're like, we can drink on this Saturday, next Sunday. And they're telling me the times when they're able to drink. And I'm like, well, first of all, that's over 21. But okay, let's look at this. Because if you go out to drink on a Saturday night, the next day, and the next day, and the day after that, you are not up to peak performance. You are not at your best athletically. So when we look at your calendar and we cross off, I drank on this night and do 48 to 24 hours, I'm not at my peak performance. How much of your season are you actually at your best? And then let's look at the goals you're trying to achieve. You're not going to achieve them if that's the case. So, really, a lot of more colleges are pushing for dry seasons because of this particular issue. Cannabis also, again, it's going to impair their hand-eye coordination, slow their reaction time. It causes a disconnect between their body and their perception, distorts their perceptions. Sometimes they're too focused and not aware of their surroundings, which, think about your child's sports, if that's an important thing for them to have. It reduces their exercise capacity because it's going to cause fatigue. It does increase. We think it's a depressant. It's not. It's a stimulant. And the ability, it also for athletes who experience an injury, you can't have cannabis in your system and go under anesthesia especially as an adolescent. They're not going to do it. So you have to have it leave your system before that. Or, not saying that doesn't ever happen, but it definitely puts you at greater risk. There is zero performance enhancing potential for this. We do know that. And the effects of it last so much longer because cannabis attaches to fat cells and leaves the body so much slower than any other substance. And so oftentimes when I have athletes who are using and they are experiencing some of these things, because they used a week ago, they're not associating it with the cannabis that they used a week ago as to why they're still feeling like this or having these difficulties because it's been so long. But the reality is it's still in your system and it's impacting your performance negatively. So, educating them on that as well. Over-the-counter drugs, it's not that our kids don't need these things, but to be aware of what it can cause them. It can cause dehydration. It can increase further injury, especially if their coordination's impaired, if it's causing heartbeat issues, blurred vision, feel disoriented, like any of that. So again, communicating with coaches, communicating with athletic trainers that, hey, you know what, I was really stuffy this morning and I used some Sudafed. I just wanted to let you know I may not be at my best, and I may need to stop if I'm not feeling well. Just to be, again, communicating that these are things that will impact us if they're in our system. And when it comes to opiates, again, opiates are prescribed when they may have surgery, get their wisdom teeth out, for severe injuries. And I'm not against the use of opiates. Like we opiates are here for a reason. But what I do say as parents is that, especially after surgery, they might need it that day, they might need it the next day, but as soon as we can, we want to get them off that. Opiates reduce the perception of pain, but increase dopamine levels, right? So not only is it taking the pain away, but it's also making us happier. It's increasing our mood. And so what we often see with athletes who become dependent, which is something that is you can easily form a dependence on, it's not because they need it for the pain. They'll say, I'm still in so much pain, I still need the opiate, but that's not really what's happening for them. It's that it's affecting their mood during a time when they're sidelined, not getting their dopamine from their sport. And so this replaces that and makes them feel normal. And so if it's not in their system, it makes them feel, again, not so great. And so they're equating it with pain, but most of the time it's actually mood. And so talking to your child's doctor to say, hey, I'm okay with them using this a day, possibly two, but after that, I would like my child, if possible, to come off, or have a plan on how we get them to go off of that. And then we also see athletes who aren't prescribed that, but especially if they know they have an injured friend, or their friend just got their wisdom teeth out, or whatever is going, if they have something prescribed for them, oftentimes we'll have athletes who are looking for those people and saying, hey, do you have any left over? I have this ankle injury that's been really tough for me. I'm wondering if you could maybe just spare a couple of those so that I can work through this and continue to play, because I don't want to take a seat. So again, definitely we want to monitor this. So again, just as we said, talking to your doctors, trying to switch to over-the-counters. Sometimes they are prescribed more than they need. So talking to your physician about what do they really truly need, and how can we monitor this, and then also getting rid of those substances as soon as they're no longer needed. Get rid of them so your child isn't tempted to hand it over to somebody else. If someone asks, if a teammate asks, let's get rid of it so it no longer exists. I want to talk about what to keep in mind for our different age groups. For our elementary kids that are taking up sports, it is very different than when we played sports. I say this to kids. I know maybe your parents are talking about when they were young and they played these sports. The expectations now are very different, right? Like, I played sports for a season and that was it, right? And we didn't play 6 days a week. We played maybe Monday through, or 2 practices, 3 practices a week. What we're asking of kids at a very young age is really a lot. I don't see that as changing. I wish I could change it, but I don't see that as changing, especially when only 6% of them get to play in college, right? So we're putting kids in and having expectations that are probably beyond where they are developmentally. So at this age, our biggest goal here is that they have fun, that they love it. We really want them to show up. And if you're dragging them to practice or a sport, you probably should reevaluate that, right? And never understand that they are growing and they are learning and their bodies are changing. And, each year is going to be different. Wow, they were really good last year, and now this year they seem to be struggling. That's okay. We just want to continue to say, you're doing great. I'm so proud of you. I love how you come to practice every day and you give it your all. We should never make them stressed about the way they perform. If they're not having fun, we really have to evaluate what we're doing in that situation. Middle school, they are developing in every single way possible, right? I remember my daughter my youngest, and she went to middle school and she was still the size of a kindergartner. And then she, in a 3-month period of time, grew 4 inches. It was unbelievable. And she had to relearn how to move this new body. And it took her months and months and months and really some tough times to move through that and figure out how to move this changing body, right? And then we're talking hormones on top of it, and mood changes and all of these things. And so again, being very aware that these are things that are happening to them. So we need to maybe lower our expectations of how they perform during that time. And then also, this is a great time to really start setting expectations around substance use. Start having those strong conversations with them about a no-use messaging. Check in with them. How are you liking it? What do you find stressful? And really practice positive self-talk with them. Wow, wasn't that great that what you did today? I really love that you did that. Didn't you think that was great? Get them to see themselves in a positive point of view. Help them learn how to do positive self-talk. So get that. This is the time to practice that. They're more willing at that age. When we get to high school sports, never lose sight of education being their number one job and sport being secondary, because only the very, very exceptional athletes that are beyond what you can even imagine, are going to get to play at the highest level without education being a consideration, right? For the large majority of college athletes or college-bound athletes, the difference between them getting one of those spots, NCAA spots, and their neighbor, their peer, is education, right? So it's still a huge. College coaches want the well-rounded athlete. They don't want an athlete that's going to, they're bringing them on and they're going to end up being ineligible. There's 10 just like that athlete that are going to do that can perform just as well and do well academically. So we want to make sure that they're keeping education as their main priority, and really making themselves as well-rounded reasonably without causing too much stress on them. And even though they may look developed physically, like, I always think we always watch everything our child puts in their body and we want them to grow up big and strong. But the reality is, and then they get older and they're bigger and they're stronger, right? And then we kind of stop looking at that. But it's still just as important now that we make sure that everything that they put in their bodies helps them grow big and strong. We're teaching them coping skills around this time too, how to handle themselves appropriately if they're not getting the playing time. How do they handle a loss? Like making sure that they're able to handle this. Yes, it's going to be painful. Yes, it's going to hurt. How do we cope with that in the healthiest ways? And then when it comes to social hosting, I can't emphasize this enough, and what the research shows us about social hosting. And I get that some parents think, what, after the big game, these kids are going to go out drinking, and I'd rather them just come to my house, and then at least I know that they're safe. First of all, I think that's a layered situation, right? Why do we think that that's the expectation? Can we change that reality? Let's get the parents and the coaches together to change that reality, because we want them to make better decisions around this. But also, what we do know about families who social host, that the kids in those scenarios are probably drinking more than they would otherwise. They're also bringing in other substances into that situation, and creating more riskier situations because they're receiving a mixed message about your household, that it's kind of green light, go here. And so even if you set some parameters around it, we know that this is negotiable, or that you don't maybe feel that strongly. So they're willing to take additional risks in that environment. So I say, let's have a different message as parents, as coaches, and provide other opportunities that don't involve that are still fun for them. Be realistic about your child's potential. I see a lot of parents who are way more invested in their child's athletic career than even the child. So being realistic about that. And again, never lose sight of this being fun and rewarding. And how they define themselves, especially if they're not playing in college, or, how are they defining themselves? Are they making sure they're getting involved in other activities as well, if this is a chapter that's about to end for them? And so, when we look at drug prevention in schools, high schools, we want to create opportunities for kids to talk about that, provide them with solutions on how to, in healthy ways, solve their problems and how to make positive decisions for themselves. Understanding that, that group mentality, and really kind of looking at that team culture and is it healthy during those younger years, developing broader outlook, becoming more interested in the welfare of others as well. So not only how do I keep myself healthy, but how do we as a whole team keep ourselves healthy, and continue to need consistent, clear expectations set by parents, right? You're the number one influence on that. When we get to college, it gets a little trickier, right? But again, continuing to do check-ins about their mental health. Are they sleeping? What did you eat this week? Are you taking time to take care of yourself? Tell me what your social life and your party life looks like, because we can still have influence and instill hope and what we're looking for, and teaching them how to care for themselves. We're still invested, right? So having those conversations, know what resources are available at your child's school that you may need to access or help your child access if they are struggling, and getting them to be prepared for life after sport. That is definitely something that my oldest daughter, who just recently hung up her cleats, I will never forget. She leaves the field for the last time. And I realized this is her last, and I've been doing like, hey, what's your plan? How are you going to meet that competition spirit? How are you going to keep yourself healthy? And what are we doing for physical activity? And having all of these conversations. And the first thing she said to me after her last time was, she gave me a big hug and she just said, "Who am I now?" And it just broke my heart. So, and we're still having those conversations. It's been a much tougher transition, but I think about the kids who aren't receiving that support, who aren't having those conversations, and are not getting checked in on during those times. So very difficult time. And we want to provide them with as much support as possible. We want to look for overall wellness for our athletes in general, making sure that they're getting good sleep. I do a whole thing on healthy sleep habits, getting those sleeps. And for athletes, because their day is so structured, they want those last few minutes at night, or they want an extra half an hour to do whatever it is that they want to do, scroll through social media, watch some junk TV. But again, we want to encourage them to get to sleep as soon as possible, provide healthy team building activities for their teammates to do that does not involve that. Communication, that they have healthy communication, the opportunity for them to talk about wellness and mental health and how things are going for them, that they can communicate that effectively, that they can manage their stress, because their stress levels are very high. Expectations are high. Their time is overscheduled. And so how they cope with that in the healthiest ways is really something we need to pay attention to, and making sure they're fueling themselves properly. And there's we'll talk about some resources really focused on team culture, right? So you're sending messages to your athlete. We want to make sure that coaches and other parents are like-minded in that as well. Let's have conversations. Are we having conversations? Is your coach sending a message around this expectation, right? Because that, again, if we're not having the conversation, that's speaking volumes as well. Letting coaches and parents know what we're expecting. And, are we providing them with healthy alternatives? Because if we're not, they're going to come up with some alternatives for them. And are those going to be healthy? When we're looking at schools, what can they do? Providing the opportunity, I believe in targeted prevention education, doing prevention around what kids love. In this case, athletics. I want to talk to kids about substance use prevention through the thing that they love. It's so much more meaningful. But looking at multiple different strategies, it's not one assembly each year. It's how do we weave that into our education every single year with students. The role of the coach is to create a supportive environment where they're having these conversations and creating open communication with kids, normalizing our talking about mental health, not just that I care about you as an athlete and how well you develop as an athlete, but I care about how you develop as a human being. And so I want you to talk to me when you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling overwhelmed, and build trust without consequences. If you do have a kid who does mess up or they do get caught with something, for me, that's a time when we bring them in closer, not push them away further. So making sure that we're very clear around our expectation and there's consequences for that, but that we also care about them and we want to get them the help that they need. If we can get coaches to do that, it's a huge, huge thing. One of the things, if there's coaches out there listening, to get some what we call SBIRT training, screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. And that is, how do we support these kids and how do we get them connected? And I really try to simplify that for our coaches to say, you don't have to be an expert in any of this. You just need to have care and concern, express that with your own observations and get those kids connected to somebody who can help them. bring in programs that are evidence-based that can talk about these issues, because we don't expect you to know everything. Bring in people who do, and have even 20-minute conversations with your team on to do that. Let's talk about, when do you intervene? As soon as you have a concern. As soon as you have a concern, and we want to get them connected to people who can address it to see what is the concern. Is there a concern at all? There may not be, but if we are seeing something that's concerning us, let's get them connected to people who can help them. They're at your school. It's your school counselors. It's pediatrician, whatever programs you have in your community. There's so much out there online, and I'll show you some resources as well. If you suspect that your athlete is using, express that you care and that you're concerned. Let them know that you're just worried about them and that their health is the most important thing to you. Be specific about what your concerns are. Hey, I've noticed this for the last 2 weeks. You've been coming home like this, or I'm really concerned about this. Can you tell me about that? Remain calm and express understanding, listening, asking open-ended questions, right? Not how was your day? Fine. No, we want to ask questions like, hey, I noticed that you've been coming home from school and you look like you're really upset. Can you tell me what that's all about? Or I've noticed this. Can help me understand that. Like leaving open-ended questions so they have to give you more than one word, and then discuss next step to say, hey, I'd really love to talk to your school counselor or talk to your pediatrician. Can we just see if there's any way we can support you better? And then get them connected to the adults who can help them. And how, if your coaches out there, how do I talk to parents about if I have concern? And parents out there, be open to the conversation. If people approach you and say, hey, can I talk to you? I noticed this with your son or daughter. Or, hey, I had a concern. Can I just talk to you? Let's make it easy on them and take that. And it could be nothing, but it could be something, right? So again, when we're having those conversations with other parents or coaches to parents, expressing genuine care and concern, keep it to your observations. Don't say, I think they're depressed, or I think they're using. No, we don't know that, right? We want to say, hey, I noticed these things and it's concerning me. I wanted to bring it to your attention. You can talk about this. I was just at this workshop and it had me thinking about your kid, and I wanted to have a conversation with you. And then get them connected to somebody, their school counselor, a pediatrician, somebody in the behavioral health world that you can get some advice from, and just continue to support that student athlete if they're getting help. Don't push them further away. We don't put them at the end of the bench, right? We give them tasks that they can still do that keeps them connected to their team in a big, productive way. Ways that we can get this information out there through preseason presentations, do mid-season team events, bring them all together, parent-athlete night breakout sessions, when we're talking about the expectations, and, have them go to different substance use prevention programming. And during the school day as well, is there testing time or there's downtime? Can we pull those athletes together and give them some prevention methods? And so as parents, what can we do? Talk early and often. I told you I was going to say it multiple times. Talk early and often. Look for teachable moments. Look for the commercials. Look for, all kinds of things that can spark a good, healthy conversation. Make sure they're getting a good night's sleep. We really want them to get to that stage 3-4 sleep, and they're going to need like 6 to 7 hours a night at minimum to be able to get there. Are they eating healthy prior to, after a workout? Are they adequately fueled for that? So making sure they're eating healthy. Be in tune with their emotional well-being. Help them de-stress with you. Hey, you know what? You've had a rough practice. I know you have a test. Why don't we just take the dogs around for just a quick loop around so we can just talk and just kind of refocus, something quick, but you can do it. And then get help if you're concerned as soon as you're concerned. Talk to, again, school counselors, pediatricians. Our communities, what we can do, provide healthy activities for our kids that don't involve substances. Our church around here does what's called the fourth quarter, where all the kids after football games, after basketball games, come to the church afterwards. They have DJs, pizza, all kinds of things. And I thought, oh, are kids really going to do that? We've had to move to a different location because it's become such a big thing. So instead of going out and making some bad decisions, they're coming together, eating, celebrating in a healthy way. look for drug take back days for those opiates. Can we get rid of those so they're no longer in our possession? And really, prevention is key. We know that drug testing occurs. I think that finding multiple things, drug testing as well as prevention programs, if possible. We know that the legal system has not the greatest impact on this. What really does matter is ongoing messages, refusal skills, education about nutrition, and a strong moral compass, right? That we are setting high expectations around this. There's definitely some information here that I'll show you. We do provide this program. I have our Peak Performance program, which has lots of different substance use education and wellness for athletes, lots of different topics, lots of different programming and ways that can be delivered. Here is a QR code that really will take you to our Caron's Education Alliance information. There's virtual programs for parents. There's all kinds of treatment information. You can sign up for our e-newsletter and get all kinds of resources sent to you. These are two great resources as well. We have what we call Powerful Parenting for Prevention, which are just quick 3-minute videos to give you a quick synopsis on different substances and prevention efforts for parents. And I do this podcast. So if you like the sound of my voice, they actually take the tone down on my voice to make it sound a little deeper. I don't know why. But anyway, Conversations That Matter, great resource. Here's a QR code for all of that. But it's on Apple, Spotify, anywhere that you download podcasts. But it looks at all different behavioral health issues for kids. And families. Caron's resources, again, go to our caron.org/prevention. It'll take you to all kinds of free prevention things that we can do virtually as well. So if we're not in your area, we can still provide services virtually for schools. And here's some national resources that I use when I'm looking up. Drugfree.org, SAMHSA's a really big one for me. Drugabuse.gov, which is the National Institute on Drug Abuse, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, all of these tons of resources, really great information if you're looking for more information. Here's some resources that I do pass along to parents: the Coach's Playbook, 360 Proof, and Step Up. These are some great resources if you're looking for more around substance use education and athletics. I follow a lot of different sites on social media at Elite Competitor Coach, at highschool.athlete.nutrition. So if you're looking for, I'm not a nutritionist, these are great sites that really give amazing information around how to fuel yourself properly around your sport. But then also I love Elite Competitor Coach. It really gives great advice as parents of athletes on how do we become the best support to our kids as possible. And as you're submitting your questions, I do want to share, there was some research or some information by one of the leading psychologists, sports psychologists for kids, and he talked about advice, what kids have asked for when it comes to what they want from their parents, and they don't want support. They want support, not pressure. Support, not pressure. They need space to make mistakes. So if they mess up on the field, we just want to talk about how proud we are of them and how, teaching them resilience, not being critical of their play. It'll hinder their growth. They are very aware of our emotions during games. So we want to make sure that we are just being supportive and happy and engaged, that they need time to develop. And so we want to give them that time. And this experience is theirs, not yours. And I think that's really great advice coming from our kids on how we can best support them. So I thank you. I went over my time, but I'm open for any questions that we might have.
Yes, no worries about that. Every word was valuable. As a parent of competitive volleyball players recently myself, it's music to my ears to think about everything that you said. And I think I shared this with you, Tina, as we were practicing. So my girls are in college now, but we were recently back watching a friend coach a 6th grade volleyball game. And I thought, wow, if my mom self could know then what I know now about how long the journey is, through athletics and how many games, how many coaches, how to work through the injuries and all these things. So we really just appreciate your valuable insight and wisdom going through this as an athlete yourself and as a parent, and from the prevention lens.
Yeah.
We have so many great questions in the queue, and they're still coming. So I can't wait to get to those. But I am going to let folks know just a little bit about Operation Parent while we're finishing up getting the questions. So these are some of the topics in our handbook. We cover just about everything that you went in today in our elementary, middle, and high handbooks. Our handbooks are affordable. They are a valuable resource for parents, organizations, and teams to get in there a little deeper on some of these tough issues that face parents. And I know that we have many on the call with us that maybe you're not in athletics, but you're in organizations that are as heavily involved as athletics. So maybe your teen has been involved in student government or archery, or that's a sport actually, but they've just been deeply involved with organization all the way through middle school through high school. And we feel like our handbooks, these tips from Tina, everything can be transferred to wherever you're at. So you can use the pop-up for our handbook and check out a variety of editions. So I mentioned the middle and high, the elementary version, but I haven't mentioned yet that we also have Spanish and Christian editions in those handbooks. So I really encourage you to take a look at those resources, see if they can make a difference for you, and know that you could grab one for yourself or for as a sample to take back to your school or your team or another organization, because they really are very affordable and comprehensive, as well as based on evidence-based research. Now I get the privilege to also tell you about our TNT prevention kit. So this is everything you would need to throw on a drug education event, a comprehensive event package which teaches drug facts and allows middle schoolers and their parents to practice with those drug facts. But most importantly, Tina, I know you've loved this, to practice their refusal skills way early. I mean, you just got to get ahead of that. You've got to have things in your back pocket to reject anything that might be offered your way. And so in our community, we hosted an event for the middle schools in our area. We were over 400 strong with parents and students at that event on a Saturday. And so we would be thrilled to just tell anybody about how we pulled that event off, and also tell you more about the TNT package, which could be really valuable at your school or in your community. We'd also love to thank Cozair for Kids for upgrading our webinar studio. We could not be more grateful for their faith and trust in us to offer more webinars, reach more people. And so they provided us with a grant that helped us update all of our equipment. And we couldn't be more thankful for that. So we invite you to join us. Many of you are already on our social media communities. Our handle is always at Operation Parent. And we hope that you will join us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and just chime in on how you're utilizing these webinars, resources, and things in your communities, so that we could share that with others that we meet up with. So you heard about this in the beginning, but this pop-up will allow you to do a quick registration for our future webinars. We're honored that you would give us your time this afternoon, and I hope that you'll come back and join us real soon for Dr. Weiner as well as Dr. Stack. All right, so let's get to these questions. Okay, so you talked about protecting players through injuries. Do you have some additional ideas of what coaches can do to support players through their injuries, what you've seen coaches do well?
Sorry, I turned off my mic for a second because my dogs are now starting to join in the So yeah, no, and I think I touched on it briefly, but I'm glad to give a more expanded answer, that I think it's really important to keep them as engaged as possible in that sport. Just because they're injured, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't go to games, that they should be sitting at the end of the bench and watching practice. Let's figure out, what can they do? Can they keep stats? Can they be there right next to the coach, giving advice to the student who is replacing their position at that point? Can they continue to provide a mentoring role? Like, what can we give this to, so they're still very much engaged, very much included in the process? Because again, when their identity is so tied to it, and then all of a sudden they're sitting they're sitting on the bench, it's a really hard point of view. And so keeping them as engaged as possible.
I love that so much. And I can give you an example. I've seen a star player that was injured, and she was basically taken under the coach's wing as like one of the assistant coaches. Mm-hmm. So she was keeping stats, and she was also like, the coach was getting her feedback on the plays, and like, it was amazing. And so she was completely engaged. She wasn't thinking as much about the injury, and like, who knows, that could potentially lead to her seeking out coaching, mm-hmm. Down the line. That was amazing to me when I saw that happening, and I was like, okay, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I also think, getting involved with like a behavioral health specialist at that point too, especially if they have some background in athletics, even if it's just for 2 or 3 sessions. Like, if your insurance has that ability to just a couple free sessions, that's a great time to just have a professional touching base with your child as well, to just say, hey, how are you coping with this? How does that has to be hard for you. And let's learn some coping strategies to help you manage what you're experiencing, because it's a huge loss for them during that time.
I love that, because they can use those coping strategies across other scenarios too. That's a great idea. Okay, so do you think can you give us some differences in how you see risk takers folding out in individual sports versus the team sports? We've talked a lot about team sports, but can you think of any examples with individual sports?
Yeah, it's interesting. The NCAA did some research, because we're talking about substance use, in terms of individual sports where they're not necessarily performing with the team, and it is really interesting. There's definitely, based on what that sport is, individually versus a group type of sport, also strength-based sports versus endurance-based sports, and that there's a difference in, when it comes to substance use, what they use, how they use, and it is very different. I think that in those individual sports, again, they're still working with a coach, and I think as a parent, making sure that you and that coach are on the same page around messaging and what that training looks like, and how do we do that in a healthy way. So you're missing the group mentality portion of that in those situations, but to say it doesn't exist, it just is, they use differently and different substances depending on strength versus endurance sports. So I that's a whole nother webinar in and of itself, but yeah, there's some great research through the NCAA on that in particular.
Fascinating. I'm glad you mentioned that. Parents are really chiming in on the piece of the webinar where you talked about supplements.
Yeah.
And so what else would you recommend? I know you had us looking for a particular label on the supplement, but are there some other things that come to mind that parents could just monitor to see if those are safer?
Yeah. So again, I will say NSF for sport there. Look it up, look up the logo, just Google image that, and it'll show you the logo. If that logo is not on the supplement, please do not let your kid use that. Find an alternative that does have that particular logo on. Again, I don't recommend for under the age of 18, but I do know that this is a huge market right now. There is a resource, and it actually comes from the international, they're a drug testing for all professional sports, Olympic sports, college sports. They have an education division as well called Drug Free Sport. They really focus in around this education and healthy nutritional opportunities, and really shed a lot of great lights, like even around a lot of kids using protein powders, and the idea of, well, you actually only need this many grams of protein. You don't need as many grams of protein as they're actually getting in those protein powders. So you're literally flushing a lot of that money down the toilet, so, and what they can get from a turkey sandwich and other healthy food alternatives is probably better than what they're going to get, as well as other nutritional value. Like, can we get them to eat healthy food instead of using the supplements to achieve the same thing? But again, I love their webinars, drugfreesport.org, that really focus in on that. And that's where I learned a lot of my education around that particular subject. And those are free webinars as well.
Those are great additional resources for families. Thank you for all of those. I can, flashing back to like Saturday mornings at big tournaments and that healthy eating thing that you're talking about. It's teaching the teens how much more they need to eat to be able to compete all weekend. And they would never be hungry in the morning, before starting, but they absolutely have to start with something to be able to get through the weekend.
Yes.
So parents, I know you might be struggling with that too. And so looking at some of those resources that Tina gave us in terms of the like nutritionist. Mm-hmm. So you can just have all kinds of ideas in your back pocket and just see if you can get some of those to work.
Exactly. Like, try it. It may not be a traditional breakfast as you would define it, but they give you lots of great tips of, okay, your kid doesn't want to eat this because they say they don't feel well if they eat it, but let's try these other things, and you can find what works for your child. And I've done that with my youngest, who says, I don't feel well after and I'm like, no, here are the things. And we found what works for her. And now it's become like the running joke when she shows up for an early morning practice or a competition, where they're like, did you eat your thing? They all know what her diet is. And she's like, yes, I ate this, because it's become kind of a joke that, Charlotte's mom makes her eat these things.
Very, very good. So a parent has asked about like starting with the 10-year-olds. Yeah. So looking at and monitoring their overall wellness. How do you monitor what's too much? But then also, as they get just a little bit older than that, take into account what it's going to take for them to be able to play sports in school, to make the school teams. So things are super competitive today. So like, what are some of your advice as parents are juggling that scenario?
Oh boy, I mean, that is the $1 million question, isn't it? Because
yes.
It truly is. It is hard. It's a hard balance for parents, because I do personally think that we're asking too much of them at younger ages. And so and yet, if they're not participating at that level, it is going to be harder for them to continue to play and have a longer career in that sport. I think, again, I wish I had the answer to that or could give you more specifics. I think, again, making sure that throughout it all, they're having fun. And in those opportunities, I mean, I did travel sports with my kids. My kids were great athletes, and I did travel sports, and that does consume your life. But becoming active and not just signing them up for travel sports, but influencing that is a very healthy thing too, that we have coaches who are taking the time within that to have fun, and that it's a positive experience for them. If they're going to spend a lot of time training, let it be the healthiest training we can find. And I've had some bad experiences where coaches who are just looking to win. They don't necessarily care about the child's mental health. They're not providing healthy alternatives. They're not setting structure. They're not setting expectations of parents and the athletes. And I'm saying find that program that has that healthy balance, that provides social activities that don't always involve the sport, but it's team building, but it's healthy, so that they're getting other opportunities to do things besides the sport, because it does become their life. It becomes 6 days a week, and we're traveling. And
That's right.
I hate to say it, but and as long as your kid enjoys it, if they're happy, if they're not, and we're dragging them. I always said to my kids, if I'm dragging you to practice, like, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for you. This is a privilege that you get. And as soon as it becomes a task or something difficult, or I'm like, hey, it's time to go, and you're giving me a hard time, then we've got to reevaluate whether or not this is for you. So if your child—
You're right. They are long seasons, long seasons. You don't want to feel like you're dragging them to it. This is switching gears a little bit, but maybe in line with where you're going there. Some ideas that parents from a team can come together and just create a healthier environment overall for the players on the team. Have you seen some great teamwork or camaraderie amongst the parents that are supporting the team?
Yeah, absolutely. And it requires a conversation, right? It requires a conversation with the coach to say, hey, this is something that's important to me. I'd love to spearhead this, or I'd love to get you to help us organize additional activities for the kids. And then work with the parents and get on the same page and have those conversations that we want to provide healthy team building activities. Let's set expectations. Hey, I'll host a big team dinner. That's something I see a lot of, team dinners prior to a big competition, whether it's later that night or the next day. And we're going to host that, and we're going to make sure that they're drug-free, and we're going to give them healthy things, doing team bonding things, create traditions for your kids that are, again, healthy. In the fall, going to pick apples, or going to a zoo, or whatever it is, like create based on what's age appropriate. Like we've done paintball and things like that are just healthy stress relievers, where they're still together and they're bonding, but make it part of the expectations as much as possible.
Excellent. Let's see here. This one is a parent asking about what are you hearing about the weight gain supplements or sharing of needles? Is that something that parents need to be tuned into?
I mean, I will say I haven't heard a lot of that among, and I'm guessing you actually mean weight loss, for weight loss, or maybe you're talking about weight gain for wrestlers. But if you're talking about like Ozempic and things like that, I've not heard of it yet. But I have, especially at the collegiate level, I'm definitely have my eyes open and listening for it. So I think that's kind of a newer trend that I'm interested to see. But as of yet, I haven't heard of that. What I will say is what you're kind of describing is some extreme behaviors. And, my goal of this is to identify, way before that. And that is really what my goal was for this, to not make you experts in substance use, but to, more importantly, why would your athlete choose to use substances or choose unhealthy behaviors? And we got to focus on that why, and address that in particular. So I haven't heard that, but I have my eyes wide open. But I will say that that's so extreme. I would hope that we'd capture that way before we saw anything like that.
Oh, great, 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 great. So we do have a parent in the audience who's dealing right now with a college athlete who's injured. They went to college mostly to play their sport, so that has unfortunately led to dropping out of school. He doesn't know who he is without the game. So I'm so sorry that the parent is going through this, but I'm also so thankful for what you're showing us to just try and keep digging in there to protect the mental health of our athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, whether it's because of injury or because they have finished their career, it is really difficult time. We should never underestimate that impact. And I would say in that situation, I would probably get in touch with a behavioral health specialist and just start doing some connections so he can help process what's happened, really kind of figure out what's next for him or her. And given that opportunity for him to talk and do those mental health check-ins, that it's really serious. So I'm glad that you are aware that it's serious. And yeah, I would suggest getting some treatment, some behavioral health treatment.
Sorry for the mom that's supporting through that. It's hard.
Yes.
Okay, so let me give you one last question. Are you hearing of any or doing any work directly with schools who are doing an alternative to suspension if there's a drug infraction of any sort?
Very much so. Because again, I feel like if that's happening, that's not time to push them away. That's time to pull them in closer. And so we do that a lot. So let's have a consequence. It doesn't mean it shouldn't go without consequence. Let's have a consequence for that student. But if we take away this other thing from them, their sport, boy, we're really abandoning them during a critical time. So yes, I address this a lot with schools and coaches and athletic directors. We're not pushing them away. We are bringing them closer. Let's get them help. Let's get this addressed and figure out how to cope with, again, let's get to the why. Why did they do that? Let's figure that out and get them some help.
Outstanding. Yes, wrap around our teens and get them what they need. Today's substances are so addictive. So we got to wrap around them and make a difference however we can. Well, Tina, I want to let the audience know that we have the upcoming podcast with you on the conversations that matter. Thank you for inviting us to do that. And so if the audience wants to keep hearing from us together, you had said that that's going to come out around February the 1st. Is that?
Yep. That's right. February 1st, it'll drop.
Awesome. Our Director of Development, Tara Oliver, joined you on that podcast. So we'd be really thrilled if folks would take a look at that. And Tina, I cannot thank you enough. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you and working with you on this webinar. So thank you. For any parent who submitted a question and we didn't get to it, I apologize. We had a lot of questions. We did get through a bunch, but not all of them. So I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question, but I hope you'll join us soon for another webinar and we can get your question answered then. But mostly, I just want to let parents know you've got this. Your intuition is always on track. Always trust that. And we've got you while you've got this. When you have your tough parenting days, we hope that you'll lean on resources like ours, as well as Caron's, and let us help you through anything you might need. So thank everybody for being with us today, and we're going to see you real soon.